Hey everybody, this is Ian Westerman. I'm the head pro here at EssentialTennis.com, and today we have a special guest with us. He is a Hall of Fame speaker, he's a best-selling author, and he's a former Division I college tennis player. Roger, thank you so much for joining us. This is Roger Crawford.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I've been looking forward to this interview since we met at the Tennis Congress, and just really appreciate being part of what you're doing. You know, you and I both have a passion for tennis, and so I'm just thrilled to have this interview.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Where I saw Roger was as a keynote speaker at this past year's Tennis Congress, which is a convention for passionate, enthusiastic tennis players who want to get their games to the next level. Roger was the main speaker at the opening ceremonies for this year. And your story, Roger, is just really incredible. It's very unique and very inspiring. And so I knew that you'd be a perfect fit for those players and coaches that follow what we're doing online. So can you please start off by just telling us a little bit about your story? And something that I pulled from your website was that you're the first and only athlete with 4 impaired limbs to compete in a Division I NCAA college sport. And that sport for Roger was tennis. So Roger, can you please tell us a little bit about what are those physical challenges for you, and how in the world did you find your way into tennis despite those challenges?
Well, Ian, I was born with a physical challenge that affects all 4 of my limbs, from the elbows down and from the knees down. I have 2 fingers on my left hand and 1 finger on my right hand. And I have 3 toes on my right foot, and I have an artificial leg on my left leg. Now, people are hearing that thinking, my gosh, how in the world did this guy ever play tennis, you know, and how did tennis even come on his radar? Well, we had moved to California from Cleveland, Ohio, and there was this great weather in California. And then there was a tennis court with a backboard near our home. And I used to hear people hitting against the backboard, and I just became fascinated by the game of tennis. I began by holding the racket with 2 hands. I'd lay the racket against my right elbow. Then I'd hold the racket to my right elbow with my left hand. But I found that racket wasn't very secure. I would run out of opponents, you know, as I would throw the racket over the other side of the net and knocked out a couple of people. So it really limited my opponents. But I walked in to a tennis store, and I saw the holy grail of tennis rackets. And that was the Wilson T2000.
Classic.
And the Wilson T2000, you know, has 2 parallel bars that are open from the head of the racket to the grip. And my right finger slipped in between the 2 parallel bars. It was kind of like how Cinderella must have felt, right? When the slipper fit. I mean, that was it for me. I was like, this racket was made for me. And so that's how I began how to hold on to the racket, hitting everything with 2 hands. And when I first started playing, there was some adaptive methods I had to use. For example, because my reach is compromised because of my short arms, I learned that I had to catch the ball early, catch the ball on the rise. And my main focus on the tennis court was this: hit the ball over the net 1 more time than the other person, and you win the point. I think for everybody watching, that's really an important principle. It's just that consistent execution of your strokes. And that's what I really focus on. And listen, I wasn't the fastest or the most powerful, but I learned that I had my best chance at being successful if I could give the person on the other side 1 more opportunity to miss a shot.
So not only did you find a way to be able to rally, but you found a way to be able to play. And not only did you find a way to be able to play, but you found a way to be able to win. Not only at a kind of recreational or a club level, but Division I college tennis. What do you attribute that dedication to? How are you able to find your way all the way up to that level of competition?
I think that's a great question, Ian. And for me, I wanted to be like everyone else. That makes sense. You know, I did not want to be looked upon as a physically challenged speaker or a physically challenged tennis player or a physically challenged writer. I wanted to be looked upon as an athlete that happen to have a physical challenge. Now, the reason I think that mindset's important was for me, when I would go out there, I would think, I'm really in so many ways kind of fighting for my self-esteem. I'm fighting for kind of my place in the world. And so tennis meant a lot to me. I mean, tennis really changed my entire life. It changed how I saw myself. It changed my belief in what I was capable of. So I think the drive came from, wanting to succeed, wanting to show others and show myself, right, that I could be successful, even though I had these quote unquote limitations. But as I mentioned at the Tennis Congress, and you and I talked about this afterwards, see, I don't think my life is really different than other people's lives. I mean, we all have strengths, we all have limitations. It just so happens that the limitations in my life you can see. Now, I've got other limitations you can't see, but part of the human experience is we all have to compensate for our weaknesses or compensate for what we're not gifted in. And so for me, I never looked at myself as I was quote unquote disadvantaged. Okay, I just had to find my I had to find an area of my game that I could focus on and I could refine and become as excellent as that as possible.
So now for the last several decades, you've spent your career inspiring people and showing people how that can be possible for them, taking their own limitations, whether visible or invisible, overcoming them and then achieving greater success. So as you've gone through that journey as a writer and as a speaker and I'm sure you've done a little bit of coaching, as well. What similarities have you seen between the sport of tennis and the rest of life? Because yes, we have our limitations on the court, and a lot of times those kind of carry over. There's parallels between, at least in my experience, between what happens on the court and what happens off the court. Have you noticed that? And what are the main areas that you see a little bit of carryover there for people between their tennis and the rest of their lives?
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with you. And I really see those parallels as well. I think that principles that you use to be successful on the tennis court, I think they apply in all areas of our lives. Something that I talk to audiences about is the importance of our mindset. There's a lot in life that is out of our control. However, we can control the quality and the content of our thoughts. And here's why this is important. Because we very rarely, if ever, perform better than we believe we can. So remember, the most important resource that we have is our mindset. Now, attitude doesn't make up for a lack of motivation or a lack of discipline. It doesn't change reality. I mean, being an optimist is not going to miraculously give me normal hands and normal legs. In life, really, it is what it is. But our attitude, right, determines how we see what is. I think for everybody watching, they would agree with this next statement. The better that you choose to think, the better results you get. So that is one parallel that I can see on the tennis court that, applies in all areas of our lives. Here's another one. Practice. I have a relative of mine who's a world champion. It's actually my mother-in-law, and she's a world champion skeet shooter. And she told me this about success. She said, practice when you want to and practice when you don't want to. She says, because if you practice when you don't want to, she said, then you'll always approach every situation with confidence because you'll be ready when you call for your target. Now, for all the tennis players that are listening to this, they understand the value, right, of practice. However, we can't just practice when circumstances are perfect or when we feel like it. We must be dedicated to practice, continuous ongoing improvement, no matter how we feel, no matter of the conditions or circumstances. See, that's what I've learned from champions, is that they don't let the circumstances define their lives, right? They're continually committed to excellence. They never let acceptable get in the way of exceptional. And I had the opportunity, and I know you and I talked about this, I had the tremendous honor of going to the Australian Open this year, first time I'd ever been, and I spoke at the Grand Slam Tennis Coaches Conference. And here's what amazed me. There were a number of world-class players and coaches in the audience. What I was fascinated about was the most successful of people in the audience, people that I recognized, I noticed they were taking notes. They were really intent on what I was saying. Now don't misunderstand me. It's not that I had anything to say that was so, earth shattering, but however, they didn't take any chances. They were committed, right, to being perpetual students. And I see that with world-class athletes, world-class tennis players, world-class executives, is they're always looking for ways to better their best. They don't look at success as a destination. It continues to evolve, and they're committed to that every single day.
So I think it's interesting that the two main things that you chose to focus on, one was a little bit more abstract or ethereal, having to do with attitude. And I think amongst like motivational speakers, that's a really popular kind of topic to come back to is not to put words in your mouth at all, but people equate this to kind of a fake it till you make it kind of approach. And then the other thing you focused on was very much practical, practicing, putting in the repetitions. How do those things in your mind and in your experience, focusing on peak performance, how do those things kind of overlap? How do we become masters of both of those things more effectively?
Right. I think, again, I think your question's a really profound one. And I appreciate what you said about attitude, because here's the thing. Attitude is not the only thing that is required to have success on the tennis court or success off the tennis court. It's not the only thing. However, I do believe this. It's the most important thing. So we've heard this saying before, that what you think about comes about. That's kind of an old saying for motivational speakers. Well, here's what I like to say. What you think about and do something about comes about. It's much more than thinking. It's about execution. It's about effort. So here's how I think the two tie together. When I'm speaking to audiences, I say this to them. I said, if I could distill down everything I know about motivation, here it is. Motion is influenced by emotion. Okay. And that saying is kind of a play on words. It comes from the BMW commercial many years ago where it talked about, that your emotion, right, is stirred by motion of the car. But what I like to say to audiences is that you've got to have passion, because passion is what's going to drive your motivation. Here's the difference. Goals are something cerebral, something we wrap our mind around, but goals require an intellectual commitment, certainly very, very important. But a sense of purpose or passion requires an emotional commitment. So does that make sense, Ian? Because you see what I was trying to tie that idea of thinking, right, and action together. Because for the people listening, and I know you have, and I love the work that you're doing, by the way. I was really inspired by your videos. And I know people that are watching them are looking for ways to improve. Yeah. I'm willing to bet that the ones that are continually looking to improve, to better their best, it comes from a sense of passion, right? It comes from a love of the game. It comes from that excitement that they get when they see some improvement, they increase their results. So that's why I think it's so important to tie that thinking in with passion. But when I'm speaking to groups, I want to make sure that I give them a message that is from my heart and is authentic, and also something that I think they can embrace and use in their own lives. And too often, I think people will listen to a speaker or read a book and they say, oh, okay, well, all I need to do is think about it and it's going to happen. Well, that hasn't been my experience. It requires effort. I had an opportunity of meeting Martina Navratilova, which was a tremendous honor. And as I was talking to her about her success, she said something that really resonated with me. She said, when you are committed to being a champion, it's not how you play when you play well. It's how you play when you play poorly. And she started explaining that to me. And she said, what really makes a champion is when the circumstances are not in your favor. Maybe you're not feeling well, you're not playing well, but she said, and here's what resonated with me: champions always find a way. Now, not everybody's going to be Martina Navratilova, right? Not everybody's going to win Wimbledon. However, all of us are champions in our own way. So champions find a way to win.
So something that really stood out to me about the story you just told about Navratilova was she mentioned when things aren't going your way. And I mean, really, for all of us that have experience playing tennis, none of us have ever walked out onto a court and throughout the course of an entire match had everything go our way. There's always something that we could choose to kind of call out and complain about and have it be something that gets in the way of our success. Some things are bigger than others. So how can we overcome those things, Roger? And again, some may be physical, some may be emotional or mental, or some may be problems with our equipment. What's the best way in your experience to put those things aside and focus instead on the process of winning or playing our best, performing our best?
I think that's what I'm going to share next. I think is again applicable on the tennis court, or it's off the tennis court as well. Our lives are really defined on what we choose to focus on. And what you said in your question was really insightful, and that is no one, right, goes out to the court and everything is going to go perfectly. There's always going to be things that, you break a string, or you got the sun in your eyes, or, whatever it may be. That's where you have to use that power of focus. And you have to focus in on the good, the positive, what you're doing well instead of what you're not doing well. I think that would be one thing. So be aware that again is volitional, right? Secondly, it's differentiate fear from anxiety. And this is an important principle that I share with audiences. And I preface this by saying, Ian, that I have seen in my own life how anxiety, right, has been much more disabling than my hands or my legs. So fear is tied to circumstance. If you're going out and you're playing a big match against someone who's a very skilled opponent, it's reasonable and understandable that you might experience a little bit of fear. Fear is present-based. Anxiety is what I think you need to resist. Anxiety is the anticipation of a negative event, whether it occurs or not. The definition of anxiety is an unreasonable and unusual response to our circumstances. So in the game of tennis, it would be the negative use of mental rehearsal. I think it's important that we monitor what we mentally DVR. What I would say to people that are listening is when you are in a match that you feel that you are struggling a bit, I'd like you to go back into your mental file cabinet, look at your mental DVR, and look for experiences where you've overcome similar circumstances. Look for evidence that supports your resiliency. Look for evidence that supports your ability to come back from adversity. Because what happens when we choose what we mentally DVR, if we can look for that evidence, it will support an optimistic attitude, okay? And what will happen is we can start to develop a template on what that looks like. What was the mindset and the method that we used in that experience that we can now use currently? That's wisdom. And wisdom is defined as experience and reflection, which means that wisdom just doesn't happen, wisdom's intentional. Champions always go back and they learn from past experiences. They don't live in the past, but they learn from the past.
So it sounds to me, if I can take the liberty of kind of distilling that, it sounds to me like there's kind of two steps here. It's awareness of number one, being aware of what we're choosing to focus on, what maybe tapes are replaying in our head. And then number two, making a conscious choice to focus on the positive instead of the negative. So how can we be better at that, especially since so many people tend to take on kind of a victim mentality in our thinking, especially during a tennis match when maybe calls aren't going in the way that we want them to, or like you said before, maybe there's elements like the weather, the sun, the wind, whatever. How can we avoid kind of a woe is me mentality and instead purposefully choose to focus on more positive things or more positive patterns that we've had in the past, like you just pointed out?
So here's what I think you partially answered the question. That was awareness.
Whoops.
See, so often no, it was really good what you said, because that's absolutely true. I think, Ian, it's really, first of all, being aware of negative thinking patterns, being aware of positive thinking patterns. See, there's going to be a lot of people in life that tell you can't do it. Just make sure that person isn't you. Okay. Because you've had this experience, and I've had this experience, and everyone watching has as well, where you have been in a match that is absolutely winnable, and you have talked yourself out of victory.
Sure. Absolutely.
You played those negative tapes over and over again. I think that it's so important that we are aware of that, and we monitor, okay, the language that we use. If you read any of the great books on motivation, or some of the great tennis coaches, something that they talk about over and over again is, monitor that inner dialogue that you have with yourself. And whenever you are uttering something that is negative, look for ways to balance that out. For example, okay, my forehand, it just seems to be going long. I just can't seem to get it in. Well, wait a second. Let's stop for a minute. My forehand's still going well. And, maybe I can run around my backhand and hit a few more forehands. And how can I start, utilizing my strengths, and what is working today? And what strategy have I used that maybe worked during this point or that point? And so, because what happens is, when you get into a negative frame of mind, it just blocks any opportunities that you might see. So, something I say to business groups is this. I say, one of the reasons that it's important to be optimistic is that it allows you to see opportunities before it becomes obvious. And I think that's true in the tennis court as well. So I think it's awareness. I think it's also discipline. And there are trigger words that we use as human beings that create negative emotion. Disaster is one. Loser is another. I mean, there's a myriad of words. Guarding against those. Losing a tennis match is never a disaster. Okay. It's never a tragedy, in my opinion. Okay. So I think it's important that we always have that perspective, right? That was really beneficial for me, Ian, when I played, because when I walked out in the tennis court, in many ways, I thought I already won. I felt that I had a victory being out there.
Sure.
Okay. So that in many ways kind of took the pressure off me. Now think about my opponent for a minute. I mean,
Feel bad for that guy.
I wouldn't want to be that guy. Seriously. I mean, because here they are, who wants to lose to some guy with one leg, three fingers, and half a foot? Nobody does, right? So the pressure's all on them. And I mean, I saw so many instances where the player was much more skilled than I was, but just because they had this overwhelming pressure that was self-imposed, they would get the cement elbow. They'd start missing shots. And here's the last thing I'll say specifically about that. Nobody's perfect when it comes to mindset. No one. It's something that needs to continually be relearned. Okay. So I think for people, that's why the work that you're doing is so not only inspiring, but the information that you're delivering is so awesome, because as people are learning different techniques and different strategies to become better on the tennis court, that's also improving their mindset as they develop more skills, more weapons, and things like that. And they can also take those principles and apply them off the court, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been fascinated by the correlations between on-court learning and off-court discipline and success and awareness and those sorts of things. So I agree. It's been one of my favorite parts of this journey, providing content. All right, one of the last questions I have for you, Roger, is something. What we talked about over the last several minutes were more situational ways in which people get pulled off track, whether it be the type of opponent or the weather or equipment or whatever. What about more fundamentally kind of underlying limiting beliefs. And I'll give you an example. By far, the most common, I hate to use the word excuse because it's kind of assumes a little bit of blame on the person giving the reason. But the most common excuse that I hear from my readers and my viewers why they can't do a certain technique or they can't learn a certain strategy or whatever, they can't develop a certain swing, is they're too old. The old can't teach an old dog new tricks. So that's just one example, but maybe you want to talk about that, or maybe underline thoughts or thought patterns that limit our ability to be successful. What's your response to that or approach to overcoming those things?
Okay, well, let's just take, for example, that someone is too, quote unquote, old. My question for them would be, what evidence do you have to support that? Because if I found out their age, I guarantee you that I could find somebody that's their age that's doing it. They can do it, so can you. Okay, number one. But I think that's really the key, because when you talk about self-limiting beliefs, what I always share with audiences when I meet somebody after a speech is they'll say something like, I just never win, or something like that. And I'll say, well, tell me a little bit about what's the evidence? And then they start talking, well, have you ever won? Oh, well, yeah, I've done this. And then all of a sudden their perspective starts changing. So the thing I would ask him is, what's the evidence? And then the other thing is, oftentimes we use those self-limiting beliefs to avoid failure, to avoid disappointment, okay, to avoid setbacks. So we limit ourselves, okay, and what we're doing is we're protecting. See, real handicaps like mine can be overcome, but it's the imaginary ones in life that are more difficult to overcome. And so I would say what is the evidence? And then I would look for other people that have done that. You and I both know tennis players that are in their 70s, 80s, and they're out there and they're knocking the ball around and they're trying to get better. And boy, they're learning new strategies, new techniques. I have a good friend of mine. His name's Art Holst. He's 94. He's still speaking, right? And I asked him, I said, how do you stay so vibrant at 94? He said, wake up every morning with something to do for somebody else. His point was, you got to have a sense of purpose. I think age and I think disability in many ways, I think it's just, often it's just a self-limiting belief. Because every time someone tells me they can't do it, I say, well, what are you basing that on? Why is it that you believe you can't do that? And then if they can't find a reason, then it's from the neck up. It's not based in reality. Now, people might look at me and say, hey, you had 3 fingers, 1 leg, half a foot, and you played tennis. I'm sure there are a lot of people that said there's no way you can do it, and you didn't have a lot of role models. Well, that's true, but I did have role models of people that had faced adversity, that had come back from it and had gone on to have great success. So I did have role models in that regard. Too often, Ian, we underestimate ourselves and we overestimate others.
Sure.
Everybody struggles, my friend. Everybody has self-doubt. It's just kind of part of life. And it's how we're going to manage that I think is the real key to success on the tennis court and off. You and I both have seen players that have everything they need to be super successful. And they squander it because of something right up here. Okay. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I think, like I said, number one, I think it's often avoidance. You don't want to fail, don't want to be disappointed, and so forth. But if you take risk out of life, you also take opportunity out of life. They go hand in hand. So if you walk on the tennis court and you say, oh my gosh, I got this tremendous risk, I might lose. Yeah, but you might win. So, for me, I know I struggled for a long time, find the courage to shake hands with people because it felt like an overwhelming risk. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to shake hands with people no matter how I feel. I'm going to do it. And you know what, Ian? I met so many great people like yourself, okay, from stepping forward and shaking hands with people. That's just a simple example. And for people that are listening, they probably can't relate to maybe the shaking hands experience, but all of us have had similar feelings, right?
Absolutely.
So if we're paralyzed by risk, we have to remember, okay, but that means we're passing up opportunity.
Amazing stuff, Roger. Before we wrap up and we hear where the best place is to follow you and learn more about you, any kind of final thoughts or things that you think would tie everything together neatly for us?
Well, tennis is the greatest sport that I know of. Tennis changed my life. And I want to encourage the people that are watching to continue to pursue this amazing game. And there's so much to be learned from it, so much to gain from it. So for me, I am so grateful to this wonderful game. And I was so excited to be interviewed by you because I respect your work and respect so much what you're doing. And we both have this passion for tennis, and we both have this passion for wanting people to get better and improve and enjoy themselves out in the court. So so that's what I would say to people, is that this is just a great game, and I just express my appreciation for it, and also that for the people watching, that hey, challenges in life are inevitable, defeat's optional, okay, and we all have the ability to accomplish great things, but that begins by giving ourselves something great to do. Too often we shortchange ourselves, or we lower our expectations, and as I mentioned earlier, I mean, expectations are really what drive our results. We very rarely, if ever, perform, as I said earlier, better than we believe we do, better than we believe we can, or we very rarely, if ever, achieve more than we expect we can. Okay.
Well, Roger, I want to thank you so much for your time. Honored to have you join me here and speak to our audience. I know that this is going to resonate really strongly with people. And again, as we've been discussing and kind of flowing in and out of, both for their on-court journey and their off-court journey as well, which really is what interests me and is what I'm most passionate about, is finding those common areas and connecting points. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for being who you are, being open to taking what you've been given and not only found a way to thrive, but also sharing that with the rest of the world is a really inspiring thing. So thank you so much. If people watching would like to learn more about you, where's the best place to go for people to follow you and learn more about your story and how they can connect with you further?
Sure. So they can go on my website, which is www.rogercrawford, that's ROGER, rogercrawford.com, or any of the social media platforms. They can follow me that way. So I'd love to connect with the people that are listening, and it's always fun to communicate with fellow tennis enthusiasts. And so if anybody wants to get a hold of me, it's rogercrawford.com. And Ian, again, I really thank you for giving me the opportunity of being part of your work, and so really enjoyed the interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll put links to all that in the description down below. Roger, thank you again. It's been amazing speaking with you, and best of luck with your speaking, your writing, and everything else that you have going on.